So this time we're doing a full motion analysis of a human being, and really this is for our clock, where our little bell character is going to ring the bell. But I wanted to show that you can just set up your phone or webcam if you have it, act out your actions to get your reference, and it doesn't even need to be something necessarily that is human shaped that you're recording. If you need to, for instance, do reference of like a little insect, you can just hold up a shiny ball or coin or something like that and move it around in space, acting out your animation. In this particular instance, it is a human shaped thing, or at least like a mechanized toy like human. And so here I am acting out, opening the door, ringing the bell, and trying to act kind of mechanical, and closing the bell again, all for really timing analysis and a little bit of what my body's doing, but really more for timing. So here I do several different takes. Important to note that you want to make sure that you have a nice setup for your camera where you can see all the important action, and always do more than one take if you're going to record your own reference. Don't just stick with one. You never know what you're going to like. You never know which one you're going to prefer. So give yourself more than enough to work from. And typically, if I was not quite sure what the actions would be, I would do this several times more with different kinds of actions. Think up first what it is that you'd like to perform, and then run through it. The first couple times are usually good practice, and then the subsequent, maybe 3 or 4, are a good one to get your reference from when you get comfortable enough and forget that the camera is on. In this case, these are the 3 that I like the most, or the take that I like the most. And I believe I went with number 2 because the third one was a little bit too exaggerated and slow. So the second take, I wanted to show also that if you open up your videos directly in Google Drive, like I'm right here and just double click this, which I uploaded, it uses the same playback mechanism as YouTube. So we can pause and we can use period and comma to step through frame by frame to get our motion analysis. Now the things that are important here, I've actually already done because I didn't want to run through that again, but I'll show you the sheet. This is just a note about how to use the sheet. Write what's important here, extra comments. This is the frame rate that I observed, approximately 5-second play length, 150 frames total. So door starts to open, body starts to move. So sometimes you need to make note of when you stop being still, the moment that you start to go into action, or think about how long you would like that to be. I also gave myself a little buffer of about half of a second before the door opens, just so it starts to play, then something happens that can be a little bit more comfortable. Door hits an extreme open position, so that would be like banging against the hinges and maybe recoiling. Body arrives with the arm lowered. Arm arrives at the ready pose, so that would be like lifting up for the first hit, wobbling left and right for that arm, maybe settling, kind of making notes because sometimes it's too fast to see. An antic before the swing, that would be raising it back up a little higher before bringing it down. Hit, arm up, hit, arm up, hit, arm up, end pose, arm down. Body anticing before retreating, and then the door anticing a little bit after that. Body arrives at the end position, door slams shut, end wobble and hold to end. I could end it here, or full 6-second playtime. I think I said 5 earlier, but 6-second would be 180. Okay, so I went through this video and wrote down all of those notes. I believe for this second take, let's see. No, this take, that's the one. That's the one I used. And so you don't necessarily need the full time code and frame numbers. So long as you can count it out, then that's what's important, especially if you've got this side by side. So let's just go forward to the end here. So I don't remember where I started counting from, but it was enough so that when my body started to move, it was the 15th frame. So I probably just picked kind of arbitrarily, but that's okay. So this would have been 15, so maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Might have been about here that I started counting. But from that point on, I'm just counting frames, making a note of the action and writing it down in this list. So we really don't need the time code. We don't need visible frame numbers if we're going to do something like that. And also remember that this is a great place to start, but not the Bible of your timing. You know, you can adjust your timing as need be, move things around and make sure that they have a more satisfying timing for animation, but it's a really excellent place to start. I've already got notes in here about things that I might want to adjust a little bit at a time because I've got a lot of character animation experience, and I know that certain things are going to need to hold for longer, certain things are going to need to anticipate for a little bit longer, or maybe the anticipation's not there at all, and that'll give my animation a little bit better interest. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a primer on how to get your animation reference for something more complicated. And like I said earlier, remember that you can act anything out on camera, even impossible things like a dragon flying, as long as you've got a toy to move around the screen or something like that. You can also do reference for different aspects of the animation, such as the flight could just be mimed with your hands to see what sort of flight pattern, what sort of speed you would want to animate. And then the actual path could be a second video in which you're swooping and gliding around in the screen. All right, so from here, I'm going to take this and I'm going to go into Maya and start laying in my keyframes to see how it plays back. At that point, I might adjust, or I might wait until I have a slightly smoother playback in Maya before I do that adjustment. I wanted to show really quickly how to set up your scene for animation again, just because this is our second assignment. And I want to make sure that you guys have all of these different steps down. I've got my clock all set up and ready to go from the last assignment. Let me delete this here so I can remake that. So here's the full hierarchy. If I'm working with objects, I like to have the outliner visible. If it is a full animation rig with curves, you don't need to do that because they will be more visible on the screen and you can just drag over them. But for objects, it could be important to be able to individually select things. So I'm just going to leave that open for now. So first thing we want to do is set all of our time properties correctly. So we come down to the little running man in the corner with the gear. And we want to set the frame rate properly before we set any animation keys to 30 frames per second. And showing my timing reference one more time, 180 frames is the full playback range. So I'm going to set the animation start stop and the playback start end to 180. Whoops, that's way too much. 180. Remember that the bottom set is the full amount of time. The top set is just what you're currently viewing, which would be dragging these little squares. But since it's so short, we can see the entire thing if we want to. And then one of the most important things is for playback, you want to set this to ×1, not play every frame. Remember that play every frame will play as fast as your computer can process, and ×1 will approximate real time. Then very last thing you may want to check is if you go into the animation settings, make sure that you have weighted tangents, and you can just leave these at auto. One other thing that I sometimes change is you can alter the auto keying right here, but remember that's the button down here that is currently red on the bottom toolbar. So there we're ready to set up our animation. There is one more thing that you can do at the start, which is to set keys on all the important bits. But since we're working with objects, and this actually works with full animation rigs too, we can make something called a quick select set in order to make a button on the toolbar up here to quickly be able to select all of the keyable attributes of our character. So going through my character, I'm going to select his body. That's going to need keyframes. I'm going to also select the left arm and hand, arm, hand, bell. The clapper is the little part in the middle of the bell. We're going to animate all of this. Toy head and hat. We could go through and select the individual channels of all of those things that we want to animate, but just to be safe, we're just going to hit S on all of that stuff so that we are guaranteed to have keyframes everywhere we need them. Then we can just delete information on the channels we don't need later on. So all of that stuff, it would be pretty easy to select in the outliner here, but I'm going to show you how to make a quick select set button. If you come up to Create, Sets, Quick Select Set, this is just a way to select lots of different stuff. And as a note, if you were a 3D modeler, this works on faces, vertexes, and edges also. Anything that you can get one selection for, you can make a button to reselect it again, which can be a lot of help. So I'm going to set this to say just character. And then there's this button here, add to shelf. I've got the custom shelf, which is empty, showing up here. If I hit add to shelf, now I've got a button that when I click it, it will just select everything. So that's a really nice, fast way to get a full character selection. Or sometimes if it's a more complex character, I might make this button for left foot only, right foot only, or hands only, or face only, or something like that. You could have as many buttons as you want. Don't worry about cluttering this thing up. You can just right click to delete them after you're done. but it's a really nice helper. So I'm going to select everything on the very first keyframe, just hitting S to key all the attributes for that. And since I've got auto keying on, it will now record every change that I make in time. But as a good part of character animation, since this is technically a character, one of the principles that we covered last week is pose-to-pose animation. As I go through my list, whenever there's a full body pose for my character, I'm probably going to select this and key everything all at once. The reason for that is it makes a sort of bookmark that in this point of time, I want my character to take on this pose with their entire body. I don't want just the arm to move into position. I don't want just the head or the body. I want the entire character to take on this pose. And that tends to be a much easier way to manage the complexities of character performance over objects where we can just key individual channels on, say, these hands or the pendulum. Okay? So just as a note. So now you're going to see me really quickly. I'm just going to time lapse through setting all the initial poses from my reference sheet, and then I'll talk about that process after we're done. All right, so I just wanted to show how far I got in the first pass of keying. And you can see the animation is nothing special right now. And oftentimes this will be the case that it'll move a little bit awkwardly. It won't really transition very well. The timing and spacing won't be very good. But that's because we've just put in the most important poses and nothing more. Okay, so what I had on my timing sheet was how to emerge, what poses he should take while he's ringing the bell, and then at what time should he start closing the door and disappear. So this is pretty common. Like if your animation is not satisfactory at this point, don't worry. You've done a good job so far. Now you need to look at it and decide, where is it that I need to change my poses? Where do I need to give them more variation? Is my plan going to work? Does my plan need to change? Typically, the answer at this stage will be no, except for a couple key points, which maybe you didn't think about before, like the character never holds still, or the character takes far too long to do one part and not enough time to do another. So as we're watching this, what I did was to have the character duck down under the door frame while the doors are opening. I'm using his offhand sort of like it's pushing against the door. By the way, I'm not posing anything with the doors yet, but you can see that hand's moving around. I am going to have this door react to that hand, but I'm going to do that after I'm happy with the character animation because it has to be bumped by that hand. The opposite door will probably not do very much until the opening and closing occurs, but I just wanted to make a note that I do want the character to kind of seem like he's interacting with that door. So I have the character emerge in sort of a duck and then stand up straight, anticipate ringing the bell just like I acted out, and then he does it in 3 different orientations, one to the right, one to the left, and one in the middle. And that's just to give it a little bit of something interesting rather than doing the same action 3 times. A good rule of thumb is that if you're going to have a lot of repetition, you probably need to add some variation a little bit. I may have gone too far with it, going far too right, too much left, too much middle. We'll see when I start to polish the animation if I want to reduce that. But if I did, then I've got nice clean poses to do those adjustments on. So here the character is preparing to strike to the right and then striking, preparing to strike to the left and then striking, preparing for the middle and then striking. So there's very few poses to manage, and I can do all of my adjustments on just that one keyframe, and that will be very helpful for cleaning up my posing if I want to. Then preparing to re-enter back into the clock. Let's deselect him. So putting his hand down, doing a small adjustment to come back to square again, leaning down and closing the door. It's that part that I think needs a little bit of help right now. It's a little bit vague. I think for a clockwork person, he needs to sort of snap to a pose and then stick to it, and maybe wobble when he arrives at it. I had notes in my timing about wobbling as well that I have not yet animated because it will add too much clutter to the timeline and also to my thought process. But in this first one where he comes up into his ready position, I had notes on the timeline to say that he should wobble as he arrives at. So snap into position and then jitter back and forth. I'm not going to do that yet because I'm not sure if I want to keep this pose exactly. So until I'm sure of that, I don't want to add those little secondary actions. Also, I'm not doing any squash and stretch. I'm not animating the bell clapper yet, even though I am animating the hand. Not doing anything with the hat. Maybe I won't at all with the hat, but all of those things are secondary. So be aware of what your primary actions are, what your driving actions are, and what the secondary, less important things are. I'm really concentrating on the body, the head, and the arm positions at this point, because those are going to be what really makes the poses communicate, and they're the most important bits. I'm not too concerned with the hands, although in the case of the bell, it's a little bit more important, and not really concerned with any smaller details than that. So the next stage after this would be, after watching it a little bit, to decide if there's any sort of transition poses that are necessary. Like, for instance, the entering and exiting of the clock need to be thought out as far as what sort of posture he needs to be in, how I'm going to clear his hat and head from under the door frame, whether or not I want to exaggerate the arc of him exiting, like swinging his head and body around to the left and then to the right, and then messing with the timing and how he gets into and holds those poses. But really, this is the framework is already laid down here, and then it's up to me to sort of mess with it a little bit to solidify my plan and then move on to doing subsequent posing. Okay? So that's the first big pass, and you want to save this as a named file. I've mentioned a couple of times that when you're doing animation, you need to save many different files. I typically do that per stage, and this is the keying stage. So I've only just entered into Maya. I'm laying down the primary elements of my animation. I want to save that as a stage. The next stage would be doing breakdowns, which are the poses in between the most important ones. Okay, we're not really going to enter into the graph editor yet at all. We want to just get this accomplished with keying and timing and with breakdowns, and then enter into the graph editor and start messing around. Don't get into the graph editor too soon. Don't polish that spacing too quickly. Make sure that your keys can communicate almost all the information you want. And if I haven't mentioned it yet, this is the first time it's going to be really useful. The same keyboard shortcuts that we step frames in YouTube, which is period and comma. In Maya, when you have something selected with keyframes on the timeline, it will snap between your existing keyframes. So here we're just seeing each pose that I've laid out as I'm hitting period repeatedly to go forward through the animation. So that can oftentimes be a more helpful way to browse your own animation rather than just scrubbing the timeline, which is left clicking and dragging, which can also be useful, but maybe you don't always want to do that. All right, so the next stage here would be creating breakdown poses and maybe polishing these poses up, and I'll probably do another time lapse for that. So I thought I'd take a second to show that strange things can happen if you copy and paste keyframes, and it is often necessary to copy and paste keyframes. So what I was just doing was changing the timing of the character's entry. I wanted it to be faster. And so now it's faster, but it's also exhibiting some strange behavior, like this arm is staying in its top position far too long and then snapping down. And that's not shown in the keyframes themselves. It should just transition smoothly. And between these two poses, I copy and pasted a pose. Nothing should happen, but the character is jiggling up and down. So what's going on here? First, let me show you how to move keyframes and how to copy and paste. It's important that when you're doing this, that you select everything that was animated all together, because if you don't, then you're going to be moving one small piece of animation around in time, and then everything else is going to stay where it was, and it's going to get very messy. One way to do that, and I prefer to often do this on the timeline so that it's very pure looking, just single lines, is to hold down Shift key and then hold down left click to select a region. So as you see, this red region will select those keyframes it overlaps. When they turn yellow, you know that they're selected. If they're still red, like this one was here, it's not selected. Then you have to be careful about this tool because the sides will scale your animation, and often we do not want to scale our animation. So try to avoid clicking those. But the center will drag the animation. So if you just click on one frame, just move your mouse above those arrows and you should be able to slide around and retime your animation that way. Or if you want to grab a region, Shift left click and drag, and then move this center double-headed arrow, and you can move your animation around the scene. So that's one thing that you can do, is move and slide. Another thing is you can copy and paste. So this frame is copied from this frame, and that's because I wanted to hold this pose. So you don't need to do Shift left click for this one. You can just be on the frame if it's a single frame. Hold down right click, copy, and then go to your new frame, hold down right click, paste. There's two, paste and paste connect. Paste is the one that you want. Okay. If you do it right over another pose like this one, it's fine. It'll just replace all of the keys directly on that time, and nothing bad will happen because of that. But make sure that you are directly on that key. Otherwise, you'll get double keyframes, and that could be bad. Now, here's the secondary thing that will happen. Most of these poses were done with default tangents, and so you can see when there's a hold like this one, it stays nice and flat for the most part. But over here, we've got something strange happening, this big bulging shape. That's because as a byproduct of copying and pasting, sometimes you get some weird things happening with the tangent handles. And so something I like to do is just grab everything, and then you can hit clamp. Clamp is a good one because it will respect if you're in the middle of a move. And if you're not in the middle of the move, it will just hold a value at its maximum or minimum value. So now with everything set to clamped, I shouldn't be getting that jittering anymore. So you can see he's nice and perfectly still. And the hand is no longer teleporting down. It's slowly transitioning to its new pose instead of popping into its new pose. So the problems as a result of copying and pasting are gone. Usually you don't do a lot of copying and pasting beyond one pass in your animation, and so try to get it over with quickly. Then open up the graph editor with Windows Animation Editor Graph Editor. As long as you have everything selected, you should be able to drag around all of your animation. If you're not sure if you have everything selected, just hit F, and then once everything is framed, drag around it and hit the clamped preset, and you should have solved all of those problems. So as I go around copying and pasting and moving the timing, I want to be aware of that and fix those problems before I do anything more detailed. So speeding up this animation now, I just squeezed these keyframes together so that he could emerge with a little bit more snappiness, and then hold his position before transitioning into this antic, which I may change the timing of as well to make it happen longer. And then I may make these happen in a shorter amount of time. But I'm doing this while playing it back so I can see what the choices are. Now it does look a little bit dead, but I was going to put in some jittering when he hits these poses, which is going to fill up the time a little bit. And so it's all a little bit back and forth. I'm going to continue working on this in time lapse, but I thought I'd take a break to share that information. All right, so now we're getting somewhere with the animation, and I wanted to pause again to explain what I did to get the small jittering actions so that it looks a lot more mechanical. For one thing, I'm increasing the amount of time that he stands still and decreasing the amount of time it takes to get from pose to pose. And this is a pretty standard classic way to achieve a snappy kind of action. So you can see it comes out, hits his pose, but then jitters back and forth, holds it for quite a while, and eventually goes completely still, by the way. For the second half, he's completely still. Then quickly shifts to a new position, jitters, holds completely still. So how you achieve this, and I can use the graph editor to sort of demonstrate. Let's do rotate X will probably do. So actually there's some tangents in here that are still kind of messed up, but when you've hit a pose, here this is a better example. When you've hit a pose, you've got a flat area, and that's what we're looking for, no movement. When we have rapidly changed position, we've got a very steep area like this one just previous. So from 24 to 35, sorry, that's our transition. And then comparatively, this little area down here is very, very small, but we've got a rapid up, down, and then back to the center, and that's our jitter. So wherever direction we were heading in, the first bounce goes the opposite way. Then the second bounce goes the same direction, but a little bit further than the resting position. And then the third one finally hits the resting position. How much time you take is sort of up to you, but I would recommend that either they start fast and get slower, and with their magnitude being very big, or the timing is the same, as in like a 2-frame gap between all of these shutters, and that the magnitude gets smaller. So this is a big jitter. This one is much smaller by comparison, just so that it will settle down. And you can kind of see that again over here, where I should probably increase this a little bit so that we've got a big, smaller, smallest, and then it holds still. So this is just one channel, by the way. That's rotate X. And my character is using both rotate X and rotate, what's the other one, Z, to get his body into position. And so I have to make sure that I do this on both of these channels. You can't really look at both of them at the same time because they're going to be completely different values. But what you can do is highlight an area, hit F, look at the jittering action, and then adjust it a little bit. And so I just want to hit further than this shake. So I've got big, smaller, smallest. And I don't think it did it before that point. But here's another one over here where I want to go big, smaller, smallest. So I might reduce this one a little bit. This means that you've got a little bit less control over exactly what direction he's moving in. But since it's so small, it's just going to read as a little bit of a shifting. So it's not really that important to absolutely control which direction he's going in. But the reason that I'm trying to show the graph editor is that when he's, for instance, standing upright, he's moving backward, like as in Z is moving up towards the top of the clock. The shake should be mostly in that direction. See, up and down, forward and backward. Whereas the other ones where he's swinging out, this is a left and right, and you can see him shaking left and right. That's more of the X value. So you initially need to have the pose that you hit exactly frozen and then copied over so that that's how long he's going to be shaking for. And then these extra little poses have to be made in between so that all of the values are sort of transitioning properly. It can be a little bit tough to imagine, but if you're trying to do this with your own thing, just put your initial arrival pose first. The last pose is going to be the one where he's completely held still here. This one is once the jittering has settled down, which is an exact copy. So it's sort of 3 copies of the same value initially. Then the extra shakes in between are something that you can just add on that one object with no need to key everything. So in fact, for his arms, these keyframes don't exist. For his head, these keyframes don't exist. It's only on the body. That's sort of what a breakdown pose is. It's just a way to help each individual part to move separately. But for the entire pose, the fact that he's hitting this pose, that is with every single channel. So every object was keyed so that he arrived at that pose at the right time. And when he transitions, when it finally settles down anyway, this one, that one's keyed with absolutely everything also. So all of the body parts move in the right way. We aren't really doing any cleanup in the graph editor yet. I was just using the graph editor to adjust those jitter values up, down, but I'm not doing anything with the tangent handles yet. And you can see how much personality this already has without anything done to change the spacing. In fact, for this simple assignment, that's maybe enough already. I mean, once I zoom out and look at the actual clock, it doesn't need a whole lot of extra personality. The only thing I probably want to do is sharpen up the strikes on his bell. So let's see, when he's up here and then he hits this bottom position here. I can sort of do this for the entire body, but it might be better to just do it on the arm. Let's try it on the entire body here and we'll see what happens. I just want to take this pose and make it sharp. So here in the graph editor, I've selected everything. You can see it's a big mess. It's really hard to see what it is we're dealing with. I just want to take this thin column, which represents all of the keyframes at this moment, and just make them linear. So now they are not going to slowly turn around from that position. They're just going to hit that position suddenly. Then we could figure, if I drag this over, that one's the top of the next strike. And then this one is the bottom. So that's the hit of the next strike. So I'm going to grab that one also. It doesn't really matter what the lines are doing. I just know they need to be sharp in that position. This should be the top of that strike, and then this should be the bottom of that final strike. Let's see. So here's the anticipation, which should be soft. Here's the hit, which should be hard. And he also jitters, which is fine. So I'm going to grab that thin column, all of those keyframes, linear. Okay. So let's see the difference then, how that plays back. Yeah, so now he's sort of bouncing the bell, almost like a bouncing ball, sharp, sharp, sharp for each one of those. It gave it just a little bit more personality and charm, and I could even exaggerate the sharpness of the bell arm so that it hits even harder with each one of those strikes. And then, of course, I could animate the wrist action and the clapper on the bell. Although now I'm thinking, that's so small, we're never going to see it. It's kind of silly that I even included it, but nonetheless, I'd probably want to do it. So really quick, here's the graph editor again. We've got all of the channels still moving, but we really only need the rotates for this. And it looks like primarily it's the rotate Z, because that's the one that's going to go up and down. The reason I know that is because when I look at all three of them, it covers the most distance, and so it must be the most important. That's kind of the idea. What we can do, though, I can grab all three of these, and all three of these, and these, because those are the three strikes. And I'm going to break their tangent handles so that I'm able to sharpen them up if I want to. Then I'll just focus on Z first, where I want to move more like the bouncing ball, so that there's a nice sharp rebound on each one of those strikes. I'll show what this looks like without affecting the other two rotate channels. And then I'll show what it looks like when I edit all of them. So there's just the, if I get my manipulator, just this direction, which is definitely the more important one. So let's see. So it's even sharper for each one of those hits now. And you know what? Looking at it, I don't need to do the other channels. That's completely sharp enough. And I don't really want to do it with the body. I like the body being a little bit softer in motion than the arm. If I were to sharpen up the rotate Z for the body, it means that his entire body is bouncing even sharper than it already is for each one of those strikes. And I'm not sure that would be desirable. In fact, let's reverse it. I'm going to make these flat tangents again so that his body is moving softly, but his arm is moving sharply. And let's play that and see what that looks like. I actually think that's good as well. Let's see. I think maybe it took away a little bit of the personality. So I'm going to undo it, just leave it sharp. Let's play it one more time. Yeah, I like the sharper action. This is a mechanical kind of toy-like thing. So I'm going to leave it like that. For the most part, this is sort of what the animation is going to look like as its end result. It's lacking in detail and nuance right now, but that's it. We've got all of the major positions in. The major timing I'm pretty happy with. The door is currently doing nothing. The clock is doing nothing. So it's not striking the top of the hour. The pendulum is not swinging. So let's do really quick one of those things. I wanted to show how to use infinities in the graph editor as well. And the pendulum is a good opportunity to use that because all it needs to do is swing back and forth forever. And it's going to take a second to do its cycle because that's how a clock works. So let me go ahead and start this over to one side, however far I think it needs to go. -15 looks good. Okay, we're going to set a key just on this one channel for that. Then we know 1 second is 30, but a clock actually goes tick-tock after 1 second. So 30 is this same position again. I'm going to key that one more time. 15, which is half a second, would be positive 15. Strangely enough, it's the same number. That's weird. So that's the opposite side. So now it's going to go tick-tock each time. This might be too far, looking at it. But the cool thing about using infinity is I don't have to copy-paste that. I can set this to repeat that, and then I could adjust in the graph editor the magnitude of the swing if I don't like it. So here's all we've got right now. I'm going to say view infinity. Oh, it's already being viewed. Okay, so actually we do see that. This line out here, that's infinity, and this is infinity out here. So it's already being viewed, but if yours is not shown, then right there. Then I want to select this curve, and I want to come up to curve, pre-infinity and post-infinity. So pre just means before we started animating, we could cycle this. I'm going to go ahead and do that over here. And then post is what we're actually going to use cycle. So this is taking the animation that we've got, and it's good to make sure that you have a starting and ending key that are exactly the same when you do this. That it's just going up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down forever. And in fact, the nice soft tangents that I've got are pretty much perfect for this pendulum also. So now when I hit play, there it goes. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, forever. Now, the great thing is if I want to change that animation just a little bit and say, well, maybe that's swinging too far for this clock, all I'll do is come over here and select my keyframes. Here's 0. So I'm going to scale towards 0. Let's make it move only about 10 units. There we go. Slightly more restrained movement. And if I want to give this a little bit more exaggerated personality, I can do that too. So I'm going to scale these two weighted tangent handles together. Oh, not scale, actually move. When it's tangent handles, you want to move them. Since they are still locked and I grab both of them, they're both becoming rounder together. That's kind of important for cycles. You want to edit the first and last one at the same time. And then this one, I can move as well. Now what I've done is made it linger more on the endpoint. So it will be even slower, longer, and then transition quickly, and then even slower, longer. So we should see a slightly snappier, more cartoony, here we go, pendulum swing. You may notice a little hiccup at the end here where it doesn't quite cycle perfectly. That's because my animation is not an even multiple of 30. Which actually I thought it was an even multiple of 30, 180. No, it is. That's weird. Let me see. So if I look in the graph editor, we might be able to figure this out. This point in time, I've got selected, that's 30. And here's 180. Well, it seems to think it's not. It needs to be 175. Maybe my math is just bad and I'm not aware of what's happening. But it seems to think 175 would be a perfect cycle. It's not really important because this isn't a scene that needs to repeat over and over. But there isn't anything happening. My animation's well done. So I could just reduce this down to 175 so that it plays seamlessly over and over again, which is kind of pleasing. Yeah, not exactly sure why that math didn't work out. Maybe I'm not thinking of something, but there we go. Okay, so that's a nice thing to do. Have it tick like that. Now the clock hands themselves, they need very little animation, so I might as well just do that. It just needs to strike top of the hour. I'm going to set the hour hand to just before this 3. So I'll have it do a tiny little tick towards that 3. So we'll set it right there and key that. And then the minute hand will do a more substantial shifting of an entire minute from this position to straight up and down to strike the top of the hour. The only question is, when do I want that to occur? The doors start to open at around 25. So having it strike 15 or even immediately, the very first thing that happens is they shift position. That would make sense. They don't need to take very long. And I don't think I want them to do any of that jittering sort of thing, really. Or maybe I do. I'm going to say at 15, they should both be in position. So I'm going to animate this straight up. Let's make a good example for holds anyway. So rotating each one of those over. Now, over that entire period of time, right, they both adjust, which is very slow. And I'd rather they held still for a moment. So I'm going to grab both of those objects. Then I'm going to right click and copy from the timeline frame 1 and paste on frame 10. Now again, this will mess up our tangent handles in the graph editor just a bit. So we want to just grab them and set them to, what is this one, plateau? What, clamp, sorry, clamp. So now they'll hold completely still for 10 frames and then shift over, striking top of the hour. That's all we really need. It would be nice, though, just to demonstrate a little bit of animation principles. Right before this minute hand moves, I'd like it to anticipate. So I'm going to give it just a frame beforehand, I think. And I'm going to key it in this position. So this is the held still position. I'll have it go a little bit backward. So now it's going to hold, go backward, then forward. And what we could do here when it hits its forward position, I'll go ahead and key it 2 frames later in that position. For this moment, we could have it overshoot just a little bit. So it's a very subtle difference, but watch it play. You can see just a bit more personality than that hour hand now. So it sort of jitters into place and anticipates its motion. It's a very, very simple example of some anticipation and follow through, but it's nice to have. And I think that for the hour hand, I won't do the anticipation, but I will do the follow through as well. So we'll have it hit slightly after. I'm going to move both of these frames forward by 2. So that way one hand will start moving before the other hand, which is kind of nice to have those differences. I'm going to key that ending position, and here I'll have it overshoot just a little bit. So now they don't quite move the same. See if I actually like that. I don't really like that. In fact, that follow through is a bit too much. Yeah, that follow through is a bit much. So I'm going to get rid of that. Now it's moving slower by 2 frames, but that might be okay. That is actually okay. So the hour hand's moving slower and starting later, but it's moving softly, and that's a lot less distracting. Okay. I kind of like those things slightly not lining up like that because there's mechanisms inside the clock that one thing is driving another. I'm pretty happy with the hands and the pendulum at that point. Okay, so that's the less important stuff for the scene taking place there. And now I want to focus on the character and especially the doors. Right now the character is doing pretty okay, needs some nuance, but the doors aren't doing anything. So that would be the next most important thing to focus on. So again, in time-lapse, I'll probably handle that, but just take note that I'm approaching this in sequence, doing the biggest, most important thing first, then small adjustments after that, then less important things after that. So it's all sort of being built up at once to be a more and more complete scene. So just to sum up what the last few steps were there, I animated the doors to open and close according to the character, along with a little bit of banging at the extreme of the hinges, and animated the little bell, the clapper, to animate along with the action of the bell. I took a look at the character and thought that was pretty much enough for this assignment, and then decided to add 1 second of pause at the beginning of the animation, which just means entering some negative numbers onto the timeline. That is something you can do. It might be best to take all of the animation data and scoot it forward 1 second into time, so we're still starting at 1 or 0, but it doesn't really matter for our case. We can just add some negative numbers in there and we get that appropriate pause. Then I made a play blast out of this animation. I do have a dedicated video describing how to make play blasts, but just for a brief summary of that, just make sure you have nothing selected, and you may want to hide things in the scene that are going to be distracting, such as animation curves, or at least deselect an object, because whatever is on screen is what the play blast is going to show. Then you right click and you can choose play blast down here, but in the option box, there are a number of different options that you probably want to set, such as the format, the encoding, which I recommend MS Cram in a quality of 100%, because that will make the smallest size video for us, scale of 1, and then save to file and choose your save location. If you already have one entered in and you hit play blast, it'll ask you, do you want to replace it? And you can just say yes. As long as you don't have it open in video playing software, it should be fine. So I made that play blast to view my total animation. Actually cut out the pendulum swing from the total animation. You can just see the arm down there. But I think that's fine because all of the action is up here where we want it to be. I do prefer that you guys make a play blast and turn in your play blast video. I do want to have your Maya file as well, so that I can take a look through everything and observe the animation graph and look at the curves, especially if you have any trouble. But your video is essential for us to do our feedback when you turn in your work, because that's going to be a far easier way for us to view your animation properly. Just make sure that you get your window to be maximized before you make your play blast, and then get your camera into a nice close-up location that shows all the action without the characters going outside of the frame of reference, and then that will be fine for the cases of our class. So there you go. There wasn't very much cleanup needed on the character, really. Just getting the right poses seemed to be enough for that. I didn't really do anything beyond our initial strikes with the bell. I didn't even really clean up the graph for the clapper because I set keys that were close enough together that we couldn't really see any easing or need for sharper tangents there. It just seems to work. Ring-a-ling-a-ling, see, like that. So it didn't really seem to need anything. I did a little bit of work on the tangents of the doors, but not really much of anything. So there we go. There's our entire animation process doing this little cuckoo clock character. And hopefully that gives you a nice primer in how to approach more complex animations. We'll be working on two-dimensional animation rigs and setups, and then implementing it in a game engine, Unity, in our next couple of projects. And then we'll go to full 3D characters and 3D rigs. So hopefully that was fun for you. If you had any problems, then be sure to post them in the comments or hit me up on Discord. And I will see you in the next assignment.